St. Paul, he was a product of Greek thought. What he did was to blend Hebraic thought and Greek thought and create a new religion which we called Christianity. It is very difficult in dealing with Christianity to know how much is St. Paul and how much is Jesus. Western civilization may be coming to an end. The book that is significant in this regard, Spengler, The Decline of the West. Spengler said that after liberalism comes Caesarism, and this must inevitably happen. In Al-Bukharis, he said, "You promised me that you were going to show me something that as a Muslim would amaze me." He said, "When I look round here, all I see are oleographs of Spanish saints pinned to the wall and plaster images of the Virgin." And the man said, "Come with me." And he took him down into the cellar, and have you guessed it? Come on, it was a mosque.
Ketebe'nin katkılarıyla hazırlanan Düşünce Atlası başlıyor.
Yakup, let's start with your conversion to Islam.
That's the last conversion I want to talk about.
You mean the last, you don't want to talk
Because
conversion?
it's too personal.
Okay.
I can talk about others that I have witnessed.
So you don't, you prefer not to talk about yours?
No, I don't like talking about myself.
Okay.
Too many people talk about themselves.
Can you introduce yourself to us?
As you can see from my headgear, I am not typically British, although I was born in Scotland. I'm really more continental than British. I was educated at 3 Spanish universities, Granada, Madrid, and Barcelona. But I graduated from only 2, Barcelona and Granada. And the reason I went to Barcelona is because do a higher degree in any subject and in any country, you have to have the qualification that precedes that degree. And in Spanish, that is the licenciatura. And this shows the extent of Arab influence in Spain, because licenciatura is a translation of the Arabic word ajaza, meaning license, license to teach. And in order to do the doctorate at a Spanish university, the arts faculty in any Spanish university is, like here, divided into departments. The language section, there are various departments. There is Filología Clásica, that is to say Latin and Greek. Then there is Filología Románica, which means Spanish and other Romance languages. And latterly, there is Filología Semítica, which means Hebrew and Arabic. And I was so hopeless at Hebrew, they had to move me to Barcelona, because it is the only university in Spain which you can take the licenciatura in one language only. So having taken the licenciatura in Arabic alone, I returned to Granada to do the doctorate. And I specialized in Hispano-Arabic poetry. Poetry is the love of my life, particularly Arabic poetry. Again, as you can see from my headgear, I am a Bohemian, and therefore I identify with continental poets like Mallarmé, Rimbaud, Lautréamont, people like that. In fact, I have a problem with headgear, and it's because I suffer from an identity crisis.
What about Lorca, Yakup?
No, we'll come to Lorca.
Okay.
The beret, which is so rarely seen on British streets, epitomizes my identity crisis. I cannot wear a hat because a hat is bourgeois and I am a bohemian. I cannot wear a cap because it is working class and I am a snob. So I wear a beret in order to italicize my essential bohemianism. And so people accept me for what I am, an eccentric. However, what was it you wanted me to talk about? Conversion ceremonies.
Let's come back to your study in Spain.
In my first year at Glasgow University, I was approached by Professor Metcalfe, and he said, "We want you to go to Spain to study in the Escuela de Estudios Árabes." The Escuela, the School of Arab Studies, is split between the 2 universities, Madrid and Granada. And he said, it is up to you to decide which you want to go to. I chose Granada and never regretted it. And partly I chose Granada because it was the birthplace of García Lorca, one of my favourite poets. It's well known that poets tend to die young. Witness Keats, Shelley, Byron, all of them died in their youth or early middle-aged, and Lorca was no exception. But he died violently because he was executed. Lorca was born at a small town outside Granada. His parents were wealthy farmers. They belonged to the class which in the Soviet Union was known as mujiks, wealthy peasants. But genius can manifest itself in any kind of social context. Lorca became famous on account of his second book. His first book was Impresiones y Paisajes, Impressions and Landscapes. But he was inspired by a very strange Spanish phenomenon, which is called the duende. At certain points in cante jondo, singing in Spain, the duende takes over and the singer ceases. This is very difficult to explain. It is a kind of folk spirit. And Lorca, because he was so close to the soil, was in fact a slave to the duende. It is something comparable to the Arab concept of the jinn or shaitan, which inspires the poet. Many people have a false conception of Spain, and this includes the Spaniards. Spain has only been Spanish for 500 years. Before it was Spanish, it was Arab for 800 years, from 711 down to 1492. But before it was Arab, it was not Spanish, it was Visigothic. Before it was Visigothic, it was Roman. Before it was Roman, it was Carthaginian. Before that, I don't know. Maybe Celtiberian. Because the word Granada, the proper Arabic name of Granada, is in fact a Celtiberian toponym. The poetry has always flourished in Spain, and strangely enough, it flourished during a phase of decadence. The hegemony of Cordoba broke down in the year 1024, when Medeniyeti was sacked by the Berbers, and that brought to an end the Umayyad dynasty in Spain. But what happened was that since courts are the focus of culture, and always court poets attached to the court, when the hegemony of Cordoba collapsed, that compelled the poets, the musicians, the scientists, and others to abandon Cordoba, to disperse amongst provincial courts, like Toledo, which specialized in magic, Seville, which specialized in music, Zaragoza, and so on. These are known in Arabic as Muluka Tawaif, the Taif or sectionalist kings. And therefore, Hispano-Arab literature flourished most in the 11th century, the period of the sectionalist kings. But remember, these were very cultured people and not interested in power politics. And as a result, the Christians in the north were making progress southward all the time. This was the Arabs' own fault, because when the Arabs conquered Spain, they installed themselves in the most fertile parts of Spain, that's to say the south. But the Asturias, the mountains of the north, they were not interested in because they were not cultivable. And this enabled the Christians to regroup and gradually push southward with the Muslims always on the back foot. One reason for this was that these courts, particularly that of Seville, were so cultured that these people were not good at warfare. This is something that is very difficult to evaluate. You must be aware of that rather ugly word, revert. And this word, I think, applies very appropriately in the case of the Spaniards, those Spaniards who have decided to revert to Islam. They are, of course, not many, and they were, until the death of Franco, the object of persecution and discrimination on the part of the state. However, I have attended the conversion ceremonies of two Spaniards. One was a young man and the other a girl. I'll tell you about the girl first. She came to the Egyptian Institute of Islamic Studies in Madrid, where I was working at that time, and asked to be converted to Islam. And Hussein Mutnis, famous historian, who his book Fajr al-Islam fi al-Andalus, the dawn of Islam in Spain, got him the position of director of the Egyptian Institute, and simultaneously he was the Mulhaq Saqafi, the cultural attaché in the embassy, and therefore he enjoyed diplomatic immunity, which gave him a certain freedom in dealing with Muslims. And he asked this girl, in my presence, what is it that has caused you to revert to Islam? And she gave a very interesting answer. She said that when she asks Spaniards, when they use the word Dios, God, what is the image present in their minds? And she said that most of them when they said the image in their mind at that moment, when they used the word Dios, is of Jesus hanging on the cross. And she could not accept this, because that would mean that Jesus is a human body, that he dies, that he is a man like God takes on flesh, the human body is crucified, and he dies like other men. And you cannot predicate these qualities of a God. The other ceremony I attended took place in the Tauba Mosque in Granada. It has now been superseded in size and accommodation by a much larger mosque in the Albaythin. Albaythin is from Rabad al-Bayazin, the quarter of the Falconers, because in Arab times there was a mosque there known as the Mosque of the Falconers. But this particular conversion, which I witnessed and which was overseen by a Spanish Muslim who happens to be the librarian of my school, the Escuela de Estudios Árabes. And she was asked what had induced her to convert. And the reason she gave was chronology. She believed that Islam had superseded Christianity the way Christianity had superseded Judaism. And this raises the question of a prophetic prophethood, or more accurately, a prophetic revelation, that Judaism was in origin a tribal religion. In the hands of St. Paul, it became a universal religion because St. Paul, he was a product of Greek thought. And what he did was to blend Hebraic thought and Greek thought and create a new religion, which we called Christianity. It is very difficult in dealing with Christianity to know how much is St. Paul and how much is Jesus. It is reckoned that if you were to recite aloud all the passages uttered by Jesus in the 4 Injils, they would only come to 20 minutes. And that is a very slender foundation on which to erect the elaborate edifice of Christian theology. However, there is a sprinkling of native converts, and it would be nice to think that Islam survived in Spain, survived the persecution of the collapse of Granada in 1492, supplied its persecution throughout the centuries at the hands of the Spanish Inquisition, which was the most brutal of all the Catholic Inquisitions. But all I can say is, all the years that I lived in Granada and attended 2 different mosques, no one ever came to our mosque and said, I am a Spanish Muslim. Converts, yes, but people claiming descent from crypto-Muslims practicing crypto-Islamism in secret out of fear of the authorities, that I never encountered. But there are many stories, and I cannot vouch for the truth of them. One of the most picturesque of these stories comes from a couple who were not Spanish but lived in Granada. The husband was Swiss, the wife was Argentinian. I am not sure where and when they had converted to Islam. They were wealthy people, and when they retired from the husband's employment in Switzerland, they decided to come and live in Granada because it was the last outpost of Islam in Spain. And the wife told me the following story. They had a friend whom they visited regularly in Morocco, and I know that this is true because they showed me the slides there of how they were going to the Atlas Mountains and live with these people. However, this man they were staying with told them the following story, that in Granada, if you go to the Alhambra, you see lots of Moroccans there staring at the inscriptions in Arabic, which in many cases they cannot read, but they have something that they can culturally identify with. And he said that when he was there, he met a Spaniard who showed quite an extraordinary knowledge of the history of the Alhambra. And they became friends, and the man made him promise that when he returned from his visit to Madrid, he was going there on business, that he would call in at his hometown in the Alpujarras. Now, it is rumoured that Islam continued to be practiced in spite of the Inquisition and the persecution in the Alpujarras Mountains down to the 18th century. And there is indeed some evidence that this may have continued into the 20th century. Now, just to show you what the Alpujarras was like down in the 1920s, when that famous English writer, he had missed it because he was called up, like so many people in the First World War, and therefore had missed the chance of a university education. He decided he would educate himself. So he bought a library of 100 books and went to the remotest place in Europe that he could find, which is the Alpujarras mountain range. And when he got there, people were astonished to know that he had been fighting against the Germans, because they thought that all wars were fought against the Moors. The Alpujarras is such a poor region of Spain that when a person dies, very often the family cannot afford a shroud, let alone a coffin. So in these small towns or villages, what they use is a coffin with a trapdoor in the bottom. And as they cannot afford a shroud, they wrap the dead body in a bed sheet. And then the coffin is placed on top of the open grave, and at a signal from the priest, the gravedigger pulls a string and the body falls into the grave. But the family is so poor that before the shrouded body is put into the coffin, they remove it because it is necessary to use as a bed sheet. You can imagine, therefore, that when this famous writer went there to live, he found the conditions extremely primitive. And therefore, amongst conditions that are so remote from urban society like Granada or Cordoba, let alone Madrid, it is possible that Islam did survive there in a vestigial manner. And the man who invited my friend insisted that on his return from Madrid, he would come to visit him at his address in a certain town in the Alpujarras. And when the man got there, he promised also that when he came there, and this was to stimulate his curiosity, that he would show him something as a Muslim that would amaze him. And intrigued by this, the man went there, and when he was here in the house of the man who had invited him, and he said to him, "You promised me that you were going to show me something when I got here that as a Muslim would amaze me." But he said, "When I look round here, all I see are oleographs of Spanish saints pinned to the wall and plaster images of the Virgin." And the man said, "Yes." He said, "It's here. Come with me." And he took him down into the cellar, and have you guessed it? Come on. It was a mosque. Or, to be more accurate, it was the Shadhili Zawiya. Now, the Shadhiliya is the dominant tariqa in North Africa, and because of this, it was also the dominant tariqa in Spain. I do not know if that story be true or not. It was related to me by his wife, but they both swore that the man, their friend in the Atlas Mountains, would never, not the kind of person to tell a lie. And there are more stories like this that I can tell you. This is a very dangerous subject. You spoke about García Lorca. García Lorca was shot at Biznar at a site in Arabic known as Ain Damma, the spring of tears. It is a fountain there, and it was an area of Arab settlement in a kind of excursion site for wealthy Arabs. Ibn al-Khatib, the great historian, he had a villa there, and in his book, Al-Ihata fi Akhbar Granada, Stories about Granada, he quotes one of the poems that he had written on the dome of his house there. By sheer coincidence, Lorca was shot near to the spring, but he was not the only one. Most of the executions in 1936 were carried out against the wall of the cemetery in Granada. And amongst these executions, Salvador Vila. Salvador Vila was the director of my school, the Escuela de Estudios Árabes. Now, you know how it is in Britain with a vice-chancellor. The vice-chancellor of a university, or in Scotland we say principal, and the continent it's rector, is selected from amongst his peers. He is primus inter pares, first amongst equals. Salvador Vila held the chair in Arabic at the university, but at the same time he was the rector of Granada University, and there was in that university a man who coveted his position. I know his name. It is Marin Otheti. He was the professor of paleographia, and he coveted the job of rector of the university, and he denounced Salvador Vila to the Spanish authorities as a Republican. Consequently, Salvador Vila was executed by firing squad against the wall of the cemetery. But he was one of thousands, and eventually the cemetery became so glutted they had to move the site of the execution.
Can we come back to that?
Ain Damma, which is where Lorca was executed.
Okay. My next question is, we are going through disturbing times all over the world, because of killings and famine and everything. So, in all these difficult times, what Islam can offer to mankind?
No, before we come to that, you said, is the destruction of Islamic monuments in Spain still going on? And unfortunately, indeed it is. The Madrasa Yusufiya, which was the Arab University of Granada, it's well known that in 1499, Thradno Cisneros took out the library of the Madrasa Yusufiya and had it burned in the Biba Ramla, the Ramla square. But Christians are only human, and like other people, they don't want to die. And the Cardinal Cisneros reserved from the library of the Madrasa Yusufiya all the books dealing with medicine, and they were saved and transferred to a university in Cardinal Cisneros' hometown. Of that madrasa, the mosque survives, but latterly it was in very bad condition. For instance, the mihrab intruded into the Zakatin, so many place names in Granada, names of streets, are in fact Arabic. Zakatin is the Arabic as-Saqatin, meaning the market for the sale of second-hand clothes. And that is now the principal commercial street of Granada. Because the mihrab of the mosque of the madrasa obtruded into this passageway, the owner of that shop, into the back of which the mihrab protruded, had the mihrab demolished. Only half of the mihrab is still there, the part inside the mosque. The damp got into the yeserias, the plaster decorations of the mosque. And although some restoration work has been done, there has been no attempt to restore the walls to their original condition. And for the flooring, they used a totally inappropriate marble. For Islamic monuments in Granada, the marble should come from Almeria, the Macael quarries, white marble with slight veining texture to it. And instead, they have put in a coloured marble, which jars with the context. Also, the lamp hanging from the apex of the dome, that has been removed for some strange reason. Another example of what happens is, there are 3 or 4 types of Islamic garden, and at one time examples of all of them could be found in Spain. For instance, if you go to Seville, in Arabic Ishbiliya, you will find quarter of the city, which is called Al-Bufayra. Al-Bufayra is Al-Buhaira, the little sea. And this was a garden type that came originally from Persia, like the Charbagh, the quadripartite garden. And there was one in Granada and another one in Seville. The one in Seville disappeared centuries ago, leaving only the name of that site, Albufeira. But the one in Granada, when I was a student there in 1956 and 57, I used to visit it quite often. It's a huge area filled with water, originally filled with water. But the soil of Granada is very suitable for the growing of sugar beet. And so the farmer had filled this little sea with soil and had sugar beet planted in it. But the palace beside that was still intact. Now, with the expansion of population in Granada, they had built some working class housing round about the site of this garden, and vandals got in and they started to throw stones at the ceiling to bring down the plaster, and it's never been repaired. It's in a shocking state. And when they created a new road, the Camino de Ronda, on the other side of the little sea, they found there foundations which shows at one time, and this was a feature of gardens in the Maghreb, in Morocco as well as in Spain, that there would be a palace on one side and a palace on the other side, so their reflections would meet across the water. A book that is very significant in this respect is René Guénon. He was a Muslim, His name was Abdul Qadir Yahya. And he wrote several books, but the most famous of them is The Reign of Quantity and the Science of the Times. In other words, materialism. That things are judged by their size, like American skyscrapers, or American everything, because American everything is big cars, big houses and all the rest of it. And he entitled the book The Reign of Quantity, that is, a quantity as opposed to quality, and the signs of the times, meaning that these were signs of decadence, and they portended a collapse of Western civilization. So far this has not happened, but there are signs that Western civilization may be coming to an end. The book that is significant in this regard is Spengler, The Decline of the West. Spengler was hailed by the editor of Imperium. Imperium is the book written by Francis Parker Yockey, an American scholar belonging to a family of musicians, German in origin, and he was so disgusted with the modern world that he retired to a little town on the west coast of Ireland to write his masterpiece. It was in 2 volumes. I have the paperback in 1 volume. And the editor of the introduction to this book, he died a few months ago, but he was a friend of mine. And what he said of Spengler is very interesting. He said, it was he who revealed to us the morphology of history. Now, morphology, as you know, is a term in linguistics. It means the consistent changes in words, how a verb can change and has different moods and different tenses. So morphology exists in every language in the world. And by saying this, that Spengler revealed to us the morphology of history. What Spengler did, and he was years writing this book, which was published in 1917, and it created a sensation. It was published because it seemed to confirm what was happening to the thriving European civilization that had existed down to 1914, but then broke down under the pressure of the war to be replaced with barbarism. Spengler took 8 major cultures, of which Islam was one: Roman, Greek, Andean civilizations like the Incas of Peru, the Mexican civilizations like the Maya and the Aztecs. And he noticed something very strange about this, that all of these 8 major cultures had passed through the same phases. And therefore, he could predict what would happen to European civilization. And he said that after liberalism comes Caesarism, and this must inevitably happen with Western civilization as well.
Ketebe'nin katkılarıyla hazırlanan Düşünce Atlası sona erdi.